The massive space station that housed the Galactic Council had never seen such fear before. Representatives from hundreds of worlds sat in their floating seats, their faces showing the same terrible expression. Outside the station's giant windows, anyone could see the reason for their terror. The Zephyrian Empire's warfleet stretched as far as the eye could see. Thousands of dark ships hung in space like angry storm clouds, each one bigger than Earth's largest cities. At the center of this nightmare fleet was the flagship called Death's Voice. It was so huge that it blocked out entire stars. The ship's commander, Warlord Thaxel, had sent his message 3 hours ago. His words still echoed in everyone's minds like a bad dream. "Give us the Kepler 442 system now, or we will turn every planet there into dust. You have 1 day to decide." The Kepler 442 system wasn't just any group of planets. It held the richest mineral deposits ever found in the galaxy, rare metals that could power entire civilizations for thousands of years. Everyone knew that whoever controlled those planets would become the most powerful force in known space. That's exactly why the Zephyrians wanted it so badly. Council Speaker Veltar, a tall blue alien with 4 arms, looked around the chamber with sad eyes. "We must hear from each species," he announced in his deep voice. "What will you do if we choose to fight?" One by one, the representatives stood up to speak. Each answer was the same, just said in different ways. The Krellians were famous throughout the galaxy as the fiercest warriors alive. Their battles were sung about in stories, across 1,000,000 worlds. But even their war chief Gorthak shook his massive head. "My people are brave, but we are not stupid. The Zephyrians have too many ships. We cannot win this fight." The Nexari came next. These silver-skinned people had technology that seemed like magic to other species. They could bend space and time itself. Their scientist Prime stood gracefully and spoke in her musical voice. "Our computers have run every possible battle plan. In all scenarios we lose. The Nexari Republic will not throw away lives for nothing." Even the proud Altarians, who had never lost a war in their long history, chose to step back. Their general spoke with shame in his voice. "We have fought bravely for 2,000 years, but this enemy is too strong. We will not send our children to die." The pattern continued for hours. Every single species found reasons to avoid the fight. Some were honest about their fear. Others hid behind complicated political excuses. But the result was always the same. No one would stand against the Zephyrian Empire. Then something unexpected happened. From the very back of the huge chamber, a quiet voice called out, "The human delegation wishes to speak." Every head in the room turned to look. Most aliens had forgotten that humans were even there. Earth had only joined the Galactic Council 50 years ago. In galactic terms, that made them babies. Many species still thought of humans as primitive creatures who had barely learned to leave their own planet. Ambassador Minho stood up slowly. He was a small man compared to most aliens in the room, wearing a simple black suit instead of fancy robes or armor. His dark eyes looked calm as he walked to the speaking platform. The chamber became so quiet that you could hear the hum of the space station's engines. Minho cleared his throat and spoke in a clear, strong voice that carried to every corner of the vast room. "The human delegation has heard all of your decisions. We understand your reasons, but we cannot accept them." He paused and looked directly at the hologram of Warlord Thaxel that still flickered in the center of the chamber. "Humanity will defend the Kepler 442 system." 3 days after Ambassador Minho's shocking announcement, the first human ships began arriving at Kepler 442. The alien news crews couldn't believe what they were seeing through their cameras. Where other species brought sleek vessels that looked like works of art, the humans showed up in what could only be called flying junkyards. Admiral Jinwu's flagship, the Soul's Pride, looked like someone had welded a bunch of metal boxes together and stuck engines on the back. Its hull was covered in patches from old battles, and rust stains ran down its sides like tears. The ship's paint was fading, and several sections looked like they had been repaired with whatever materials the crew could find. Next to the beautiful, curved ships of other species, it looked embarrassing. But Admiral Jinwu didn't seem to care about appearances. He was a tough-looking man in his 50s with grey hair and scars on his hands from years of military service. When reporters asked him about his ugly ships, he just smiled. "Pretty ships sink just as fast as ugly ones," he said simply. "We didn't come here to win a beauty contest." The Zephyrian commanders watched the human fleet arrive and started laughing. Their communications channels filled with jokes about the hairless apes and their trash boats. Warlord Thaxel himself appeared on Galactic News to mock the humans. "Look at these primitive creatures," he said, his 4 eyes gleaming with amusement. "They bring toys to fight an empire. We have conquered 1,000 worlds with ships like these standing in our way." Never. Captain Sona didn't pay attention to the insults. She was too busy preparing her ship and crew for what everyone knew would be their last mission. The destroyer, Incheon, was typical of the human fleet, old, patched up and running on spare parts. But her crew loved that ship like it was their home, because in many ways it was. "Listen up, everyone," Sona announced over the ship's communication system. Her voice was calm but serious. "I'm not going to lie to you. We're outnumbered 50-1. Their ships are bigger, faster, and stronger than ours. Most of the galaxy thinks we're about to die for nothing." She paused, looking around at the faces of her crew. "But here's what they don't understand. We're not here because we think we can win. We're here because someone has to try." Engineer Kyung worked frantically in the ship's engine room, trying to squeeze every bit of power from their old reactor. "These engines weren't designed for combat," he muttered to his assistant. "But maybe we can make them angry enough to surprise a few Zephyrians." Meanwhile, throughout the Kepler 442 system, something strange was happening. While human ships moved into defensive positions, ships from every other species were running away as fast as they could. Merchant vessels, research stations, mining operations, everyone was evacuating. The humans found themselves completely alone in a star system that would soon become a battlefield. Marine Sergeant Tae-hyun gathered his soldiers in the ship's small training room. These weren't professional soldiers like other species had. They were miners, engineers, teachers, and shop owners who had volunteered when Earth called for defenders. "We might not have fancy weapons or energy shields," he told them, "but we have something those Zephyrians have never faced before. We have nothing left to lose and everything to fight for." The human fleet took their positions around the most important planets in the system. They knew the Zephyrians would come soon, and when they did, Earth's children would be ready to show the galaxy what real courage looked like. The attack came at dawn, galaxy time, when most species would be starting their daily routines. But there was nothing routine about what happened next. The Zephyrian fleet moved forward like a wall of death, their massive ships blotting out the stars. Their plasma cannons began firing before they even got close, sending streams of deadly energy across the darkness of space. Admiral Jinwoo watched from the bridge of Seoul's Pride as the first shots hit his ships. The destroyer Busan's Hope simply vanished in a ball of green fire. 23 good people gone in a single second. The cruiser, Daejeon's Stand, lasted a few seconds longer before its hull cracked open like an egg, spilling air and crew into the cold vacuum. "All ships, return fire," Jinwoo ordered. But he knew their weapons were like throwing rocks at a mountain. Human kinetic cannons fired solid metal slugs that bounced harmlessly off Zephyrian energy shields. Their missiles exploded against invisible barriers without leaving a scratch. Captain Hyunwoo commanded the heavy cruiser Gwangju's Fury, one of the biggest ships in the human fleet. He watched his weapons do nothing against the enemy, while Zephyrian plasma beams cut through his armor like a hot knife through butter. His ship was dying around him, half his crew was already dead, and the engines were failing. "Captain, we need to abandon ship," his first officer shouted over the alarms and explosions. But Hyunwoo looked at the massive Zephyrian cruiser that was tearing his ship apart, and he made a decision that would change everything. "All hands, get to the escape pods now," he ordered. Then he turned to his helmsman, a young woman named Mikyung who had stayed at her post despite a broken arm. "Can you give me ramming speed?" Mikyung's eyes went wide, but she nodded. "Yes, sir, but the escape pods—" "We'll launch in 30 seconds, that's enough time." Hyunwoo's voice was calm, like he was ordering lunch instead of his own death. "Tell my wife I kept my promise to come home a hero." The Gwangju's Fury suddenly changed direction, pointing its broken nose directly at the Zephyrian cruiser. The enemy ship tried to move, but it was too big and too slow. Hyunwoo's ship hit it at full speed, both vessels disappearing in an explosion that lit up half the solar system. Across the battlefield, Lieutenant Yuna was fighting her own desperate battle. Her small fighter had been hit twice, and she was flying on emergency power. Her squadron was gone, 12 other pilots who had been laughing and joking just an hour before. Now she was alone, facing a wing of Zephyrian bombers heading toward one of the human destroyers. Yuna's fighter couldn't possibly stop all those bombers. Her weapons were nearly empty, and her ship was barely staying together. But she could see the destroyer Incheon below, where Captain Sona and her crew were still fighting. Those bombers would finish them off in seconds. "Sorry, Mom," Yuna whispered to herself. "Looks like I won't be coming home for dinner after all." She pushed her fighter's engines to maximum and dove straight into the middle of the bomber formation. Her ship's reactor, already damaged from enemy fire, couldn't handle the stress. The explosion took out 6 Zephyrian bombers and saved the Incheon, but Lieutenant Yuna was gone. The battle raged for hours. Human ships died one after another, but each time a ship was destroyed, it seemed to take at least one Zephyrian vessel with it. The aliens had expected an easy victory, a quick slaughter of primitive humans. Instead, they found themselves in the bloodiest fight of their lives. The galaxy watched in shocked silence as Earth's children refused to surrender, even as their fleet burned around them. The Zephyrians had conquered hundreds of worlds, but they had never faced an enemy like the humans. Every species they had fought before followed the same pattern. When their ships were destroyed and their weapons ran out, they surrendered with dignity. That's how civilized warfare was supposed to work in the galaxy, but humans didn't seem to understand the rules. Engineer Do-yoon was working in the cargo bay of the destroyer Incheon when he got an idea that would have horrified any proper military officer. The ship's weapons were almost out of ammunition, but the cargo hold was full of mining equipment that had been heading to the Kepler 442 colonies. Do-hyun looked at the industrial explosives used for breaking apart asteroids and smiled. "Seojun, help me with these charges," he called to his assistant. "We're going to make some very unfriendly surprises for our visitors." Working quickly, Do-hyun began converting mining explosives into proximity bombs. These weren't elegant weapons. They were crude, dangerous, and completely against every rule of space combat. But they worked. When Zephyrian fighters came too close to the Incheon, they found themselves flying into clouds of spinning death that tore their ships apart. The Zephyrian pilots started complaining to their commanders. "These humans fight like savages." One pilot reported. "They're using industrial equipment as weapons." But the real shock came when the humans ran out of long-range weapons entirely. Most species would have surrendered at that point, but the humans did something that made Zephyrian commanders question their own sanity. They boarded the enemy ships. Marine Jisoo had been a factory worker before the war started. She knew how to fix machines, weld metal, and work with her hands. When her squad's plasma rifles ran dry during a boarding action on a Zephyrian cruiser, she didn't panic. She just picked up her welding torch and kept fighting. "Stay close to me," she shouted to her team as they fought their way through the enemy ship's corridors. "If we can reach their engine room, we can shut down their whole ship." The Zephyrian crew couldn't believe what they were seeing. These humans were fighting with construction tools. Jisoo's welding torch cut through alien armor like it was made of paper. Her teammate Chang-min swung a crowbar that he had grabbed from a maintenance closet, using it to smash enemy equipment and knock Zephyrian soldiers off their feet. "This is insane," a Zephyrian officer screamed into his communicator. "They're using maintenance equipment as weapons. How do we fight an enemy that doesn't follow any rules?" The answer was simple. They couldn't. The Zephyrians had trained for centuries to fight honorable battles against civilized enemies. They knew how to deal with energy weapons, plasma cannons, and missile strikes. But they had no idea how to fight people who turned mining equipment into bombs and used welding torches as swords. Mechanic Wusung discovered that human repair tools worked perfectly for taking apart Zephyrian technology. His power drill, designed for fixing ship engines, could bore through alien armor and disable their weapon systems. Kirk Hygiene found that her kitchen knives were made of metal that could cut Zephyrian control cables. The worst part for the Zephyrians was that every time they destroyed a human ship, the survivors would use the wreckage as weapons. Broken pieces of hull became flying projectiles, damaged engines became bombs. Even the human's own blood became a weapon, when Medic Minseo realized that human blood could short-circuit Zephyrian electronics. As reports came in from across the battlefield, Warlord Thaxel began to understand that he wasn't fighting a normal war. The humans weren't just refusing to surrender, they were turning the very concept of civilized warfare upside down. Every victory against them cost more ships than it should have. Every destroyed human vessel became a source of improvised weapons for the survivors. The galaxy watched in fascination and horror as Earth's children proved that sometimes the most dangerous enemy is the one who doesn't play by the rules. The galactic news networks had expected to broadcast a quick execution. Their cameras were positioned to capture the moment when the mighty Zephyrian Empire crushed another rebellious species in a matter of hours. Instead, they found themselves covering the most shocking military event in recorded history. Week 1 passed and the humans were still fighting. Week 2 came and went, with Earth's battered fleet somehow still holding their positions around Kepler 442. By week 3, species across the galaxy had stopped their normal activities just to watch the impossible unfold on their screens, on sea. The Krellian homeworld, young warriors gathered in bars and training halls to watch the daily battle reports. The Krellians had built their entire culture around the idea that they were the galaxy's greatest fighters. But as they watched humans turn mining equipment into weapons and ram-damaged ships into enemy cruisers, many began to feel ashamed. "Look at them," said Krogar, a young Krellian soldier who had just finished his military training. He pointed at the screen showing a human engineer using a welding torch to fight off Zephyrian borders. "They have no advanced weapons, no energy shields, no battle armor, but they fight like demons." His older brother Thrak, a veteran warrior, shook his massive head sadly. "We told ourselves we were being smart by avoiding this fight. But watching these humans, maybe being smart isn't the same as being brave." The conversation was happening all across Krellian space. Young warriors who had been told that discretion was the better part of valor were now seeing what real courage looked like. They began to question why their leaders had backed down so quickly when these primitive humans were willing to die for strangers. Meanwhile, on the advanced world of Nexus Prime, the galaxy's greatest scientists were having their own crisis. The Nexari had always prided themselves on logical thinking and calculated strategies. Their quantum computers could predict the outcome of any battle with perfect accuracy. But the humans kept doing things that made no mathematical sense. Dr. Zylara, the Nexari Republic's chief military analyst, stared at her screens in confusion. "According to every model we have, the human fleet should have been destroyed in the first hour," she told her research team. "Their tactics violate every principle of space combat we've established over the last 1,000 years." Her assistant, a young scientist named Velox, pulled up footage of humans using industrial equipment as weapons. "They're not following any established patterns," he said with wonder in his voice. "When they run out of military supplies, they improvise. When their ships are damaged, they use the damage as a weapon. It's like they're rewriting the rules of war in real time." The most surprising reaction came from the Ethereals, a peaceful species that had sworn off all forms of violence centuries ago. These gentle, floating beings usually stayed completely neutral in any conflict, but something about the human sacrifice moved them deeply. Elder Luminara, the spiritual leader of the Ethereal Council, watched the humans fight with tears glowing in her large silver eyes. "These beings fight not for conquest or glory, but to protect others," she whispered to her followers. "How can we stand by and watch such nobility be destroyed?" Despite their pacifist beliefs, the Ethereals began secretly sending medical supplies to the human fleet. They couldn't bring themselves to provide weapons, but they could ease the suffering of the wounded. Small ethereal ships, disguised as merchant vessels, slipped through Zephyrian lines carrying healing equipment and medicine. The supplies came with simple messages From those who cannot fight to those who will not stop fighting. Even some Zephyrian soldiers began to question what they were doing. Commander Vexitar, a veteran of 50 campaigns, found himself troubled by reports from the front lines. In every other war, the enemy eventually breaks, he told his second-in-command. Fear defeats them, or pain, or simple exhaustion. But these humans, they seem to get stronger when they're hurt. His aide nodded grimly. The troops are starting to call them the unbreakable ones. They say fighting humans is like trying to kill an idea instead of killing a person. As the fourth week began, something unprecedented was happening across the galaxy. Species that had never cared about each other were united in watching one small group of humans refuse to give up. The battle for Kepler 442 had become more than a military conflict. It had become a test of what civilized beings truly believed in. By the end of the fourth week, Admiral Jinwu knew his fleet couldn't hold much longer. The Soul's Pride was barely held together with emergency repairs and sheer willpower. Half his ships were gone, and the other half were running on fumes and spare parts. But as he looked at the massive Zephyrian flagship Death's Voice hanging in space like a dark mountain, he made a decision that would shake the galaxy. "All remaining ships, this is Admiral Jinwu," he announced over the fleet communications. His voice was tired but determined. "We're going to do something that's either very brave or very stupid. We're going to attack their flagship directly." The bridge crew of Soul's Pride looked at their admiral like he had lost his mind. Communications Officer Hajin spoke up carefully. "Sir, that ship is 50 times bigger than us. It has more guns than our entire fleet combined." Jinwu smiled grimly. "That's exactly why they won't expect us to be crazy enough to try it. Sometimes the best strategy is to do something so insane that your enemy can't plan for it." The plan was simple in its madness. While the remaining human ships created a distraction, Soul's Pride would ram straight into the flagship's docking bay. Once inside, they would fight their way to the ship's core and plant explosives throughout the massive vessel. It was a suicide mission, and everyone knew it. Demolitions expert Somin checked her equipment one last time. She had been a construction worker before the war, used to working with dangerous explosives in tight spaces. Now she was preparing to plant enough charges to destroy a ship the size of a small city. "Admiral, I need at least 20 minutes to place the charges properly," she told Jinwu. "The ship's too big to destroy with just 1 or 2 explosions." "You'll have your 20 minutes, Jinwu promised, "even if I have to fight every Zephyrian on that ship personally." The assault began at what humans called midnight, though time meant little in the darkness of space. The surviving human ships attacked the Zephyrian fleet from 3 directions, drawing their attention away from the flagship. Soul's Pride slipped through the chaos like a ghost, its engines running silent and its weapons powered down. The Zephyrians didn't realize what was happening until it was too late. Soul's Pride smashed through the flagship's main docking bay, crushing several fighter craft and sending alien crew members running for cover. Jinwu and his boarding party poured out of their ship, fighting their way deeper into the massive vessel. The corridors of Death's Voice were like underground tunnels, stretching endlessly in all directions. Zephyrian soldiers rushed to stop the intruders, but the humans fought with the desperate fury of people who had nothing left to lose. Jinwu led from the front, using a simple plasma rifle taken from a fallen enemy. While the battle raged in the corridors, Somin worked quietly in the ship's engine sections. She moved through the massive machinery like a spider, placing charges in exactly the right spots to cause maximum damage. Her hands were steady despite the explosions and gunfire echoing through the ship. The inevitable confrontation came when Jinwu reached the flagship's command center. Warlord Thaxel was waiting for him, a massive alien warrior with 4 arms and eyes that glowed with hatred. The Zephyrian leader was twice the size of any human, covered in natural armor that had turned aside weapons for decades. "So the little hairless ape comes to die in my presence," Thaxel growled, his voice like grinding stone. "You have caused me much trouble, human, but now you will pay for your arrogance." Jinwu looked up at the towering alien warlord and shrugged. "Maybe, but at least I'll die knowing I gave you the fight of your life." The battle between the 2 leaders was brutal and short. Thaxel's superior size and strength overwhelmed Jinwu quickly, but the human admiral had one last surprise. As the warlord's claws pierced his chest, Jinwu smiled and pressed a small device in his hand. "Summon," he whispered into his communicator. "Light it up." The explosion that followed could be seen from 3 star systems away. The Death's voice, pride of the Zephyrian fleet, broke apart like a toy. Both Admiral Jinwu and Warlord Thaxel died in the blast, but humanity had proven something important to the galaxy. Even giants could bleed. The destruction of Death's voice sent shockwaves across the galaxy that had nothing to do with the massive explosion. For the first time in centuries, someone had killed a Zephyrian warlord. The Invincible Empire had lost its most powerful ship and its most feared leader to a small group of humans who weren't supposed to last a single day. The news spread faster than light itself through the galaxy's communication networks. On every world, in every space station, beings gathered around their screens to watch the footage over and over again. A tiny human ship ramming into the Empire's flagship, Admiral Jinwu fighting a creature twice his size. The explosion that lit up the darkness of space like a new star being born. But it wasn't just the military victory that moved the galaxy. It was the sacrifice. Jinwu could have retreated. He could have saved himself and his crew. Instead, he chose to give his life to prove that the Zephyrian Empire could be beaten. That simple act of courage began to change everything. On the Krellian homeworld, Yangtze, warriors were no longer content to listen to their elders' excuses. Krogar, the soldier who had been watching the human battles, stood up in the Great Assembly where Krellian leaders were still debating whether to stay neutral. "Honored elders," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the massive hall, "we have watched humans die for 4 weeks to defend strangers. They have shown us what real warriors look like. How can we call ourselves the galaxy's greatest fighters if we're too afraid to fight alongside the bravest beings we've ever seen?" The young warrior's words sparked something that Krellian leaders couldn't control. Across their world, soldiers began demanding action. They chanted Jinwu's name in their barracks. They painted human symbols on their armor. They refused to train until their government joined the fight. War Chief Gorthak, the massive Krellian leader who had originally advised against fighting, found himself facing a rebellion from his own troops. His personal guard, warriors who had followed him for decades, came to him with a simple message. "Chief," said his most trusted captain, "our honor is dying while we sit here in safety. The humans have shown us that some things are worth dying for. We will follow you anywhere, but we cannot follow you into cowardice." Gorthak looked at his warriors, beings he had trained, fought beside, and considered family. In their eyes, he saw something he hadn't seen in years: shame. They were ashamed of their leaders, ashamed of their government, and most of all, ashamed of themselves for abandoning brave allies. "Prepare the fleet," Gorthak finally announced. "We go to join the humans." When the Krellian battle fleet arrived at Kepler 442, they found a battered human force that could barely believe their eyes. Captain Sonar, now the senior human commander after Jinwu's death, received Gorthak's transmission with tears in her eyes. "Human captain," the war chief's deep voice rumbled over the communications, "my people have been fools. We forgot that true strength comes not from winning easy battles, but from standing beside those who fight impossible ones. Krellian warriors request permission to die alongside human heroes. But the Krellians weren't alone. The Nexari Republic, moved by their scientists' admiration for human creativity, sent their most advanced weapons. Ships carrying quantum torpedoes and plasma shields arrived with messages of support. "From those who think too much to those who feel just enough," read the transmission from the Nexari Council. The smaller species of the galaxy found their own courage in humanity's example. The peaceful Lumarians sent their few warships, piloted by farmers and teachers who had never fired a weapon in anger. The aquatic tidewalkers emerged from their ocean worlds for the first time in centuries, bringing strange underwater fighting techniques to space combat. Even some individual Zephyrians began to question their empire's methods. Commander Vexitar, who had been troubled by the humans' refusal to break, made a decision that would have been unthinkable weeks before. He opened a secret communication channel to the human fleet. "I am Vextar of the Zephyrian Fourth Fleet," he transmitted. "I have fought in 50 wars for my empire, but I have never seen enemies die as bravely as your Admiral Jinwu. Some of my officers wish to join you. The galaxy was changing, and it was happening because one small group of humans had refused to give up when everyone else had given in to fear." Jinwu's sacrifice had become a spark that was lighting fires of courage across 1,000 worlds. The command ship Unity's Dawn was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen before. Built quickly from parts donated by dozens of species, it looked like someone had taken pieces from every type of ship in known space and somehow made them work together. Human engineering connected Krellian armor plating to Nexari energy systems, while ethereal communication crystals linked everything into one functioning whole. Colonel Minji stood in the ship's command center next to War Chief Gorthak, and the sight would have been impossible to imagine just weeks before. The small human woman, promoted after Captain Sona died in the battle for the Third Moon, was giving tactical advice to a Krellian warrior who stood 3 times her height and had been fighting wars since before Earth joined the galactic community. "The 4 Zephyrians are regrouping near the gas giant," Minji reported, studying the holographic display that showed enemy ship movements. "They're trying to use the planet's gravity well to set up a defensive position." Gorthak nodded his massive head, his 4 eyes focusing on the tactical display. "In the old days, my people would charge straight at them and try to break their line with brute force. But you humans have taught us that sometimes the indirect approach works better." It was true. The Alliance fleet didn't fight like any single species. Instead, they combined the best tactics from everyone. Human creativity mixed with Krellian strength, Nexari technology enhanced human ingenuity, and smaller species contributed specialized skills that surprised everyone. Pilot Sunho was living proof of this new way of fighting. His fighter was a hybrid creation that would have been impossible to build before the Alliance formed. The cockpit was human-designed for maximum maneuverability, but it was powered by a Nexari quantum engine and protected by Krellian armor plating. Plumerian crystal technology gave him enhanced sensors, while Tidewalker navigation systems helped him move through space like he was swimming through water. "This is Sunho to command," he reported as he led his mixed squadron toward the Zephyrian formation. "We're seeing something new. The enemy ships are acting confused. They keep trying to target us using old tactics, but we're not fighting like any single species they've faced before." Communications Officer Nari had perhaps the hardest job in the fleet. She had to coordinate attacks between species that had never worked together before, using languages and communication methods that were completely different. Her console looked like organized chaos, with translation programs running constantly to help a Krellian war cry make sense to an ethereal meditation warrior. "Krellian heavy cruisers, advance to position Delta 7, she transmitted, her voice calm despite the complexity of managing dozens of different species in combat. "Nexari science ships, prepare quantum torpedoes for targeted launch. Human. Engineering teams, stand by for emergency repairs on any allied vessel that needs help." The Zephyrians had built their empire by conquering one species at a time. They had detailed battle plans for fighting Krellians, proven tactics for defeating Nexari technology, and established methods for crushing smaller species through intimidation, but they had no idea how to fight all of them working together. When the Alliance fleet attacked, it was like nothing the Zephyrians had ever experienced. Human fighters, enhanced with alien technology, dove through their formations using tactics that made no sense according to established military doctrine. Krellian heavy ships, guided by human creativity, struck at weak points that Zephyrian computers said were impossible to reach. The most devastating attacks came from the smallest species. Lumarian ships, normally used for peaceful farming operations, had been converted into mobile repair stations. They could fix damaged Alliance ships in the middle of battle, something the Zephyrians never expected. Tidewalker vessels used their underwater hunting instincts to attack from angles that spaceborne species couldn't even imagine. "Enemy fleet is breaking formation," reported sensor operator Dongmin from his station. They're trying to retreat, but our ethereal coordinators are predicting their moves before they make them. The Zephyrians, for the first time in their imperial history, found themselves running from a battle. Their ships had been designed to overpower individual species through superior firepower and intimidation, but faced with an enemy that combined the strengths of dozens of different civilizations, they discovered that their traditional methods were useless. The battle lasted only 6 hours, but it changed the balance of power in the galaxy forever. The mighty Zephyrian Empire, which had conquered 1,000 worlds, was defeated by an alliance that had formed around the courage of one small human fleet. The surrender ceremony took place on the same space station where the crisis had begun 6 weeks earlier. But everything was different now. The Galactic Council chamber, which had once echoed with fear and cowardice, now buzzed with something the galaxy hadn't felt in centuries. Hope, Zephyrian Admiral Kexivor, the replacement for the dead warlord. Thaxel stood before the assembled representatives, with his head bowed in defeat. His once proud uniform was torn and stained from the battles his forces had lost. Behind him, the remnants of the invincible Zephyrian fleet waited in surrender formation, their weapons powered down and their mighty ships looking somehow smaller than before. The Zephyrian Empire formally surrenders all claims to the Kepler 442 system, Admiral Kexivor announced, his voice barely above a whisper. We did not expect such resistance. We were unprepared for an enemy that would not break. Colonel Minji accepted the surrender on behalf of the Alliance. She looked tired. They all did. The cost of victory had been enormous. Half the human fleet was gone, and thousands of brave souls from dozens of species had given their lives to stop the Zephyrian expansion. But they had won something more valuable than any battle. They had proven that bullies could be defeated when good people stood together. The Kepler 442 system will be administered jointly by all Alliance members, Minji announced. No single species will control these worlds. They will be a symbol of what we can accomplish when we work together instead of fighting each other. The real surprise came during the Council reorganization meetings that followed. When the time came to assign permanent seats on the Galactic Council, humanity was offered a position normally reserved for the galaxy's most powerful civilizations. Not because they had the biggest fleet or the most advanced technology, but because they had proven something far more important. Elder Veltar, the council speaker who had witnessed humanity's first stand, explained it simply. Strength fades. Technology becomes obsolete. But courage inspires others to be better than they thought possible. The humans have earned their place not through power, but through the willingness to stand up when everyone else sat down. The memorial service was held on the third planet of Kepler 442, a world that had been saved by human sacrifice. Representatives from every species in the galaxy came to honor the fallen. The memorial itself was designed by human architects, but built with materials donated by dozens of worlds, making it a true symbol of unity. The names were carved in stone that would last forever. Admiral Jinwoo, who died ramming the enemy flagship. Captain Sona, who held the line when retreat would have been logical. Captain Hyunwoo, who showed the galaxy that courage could be contagious. Lieutenant Yuna, who proved that even the smallest fighter could make the biggest difference. Hundreds of other names followed, each representing someone who chose to fight when fighting seemed hopeless. War Chief Gorthak, now a close friend of Colonel Minji, spoke at the ceremony. His deep voice carried across the gathering like distant thunder. We Krellians thought we understood warfare. We believed that victory belonged to the strongest, the fastest, the most heavily armed, but these humans taught us that the most important weapon in any battle is the refusal to give up. Dr. Zilara, the Nexari scientist who had studied human tactics, added her own tribute. In our laboratories, we can calculate the probability of any outcome, but we learned that some things cannot be measured by mathematics. The human spirit is one of those things. It defies logic, ignores probability, and achieves the impossible. As the ceremony concluded, children from dozens of species placed flowers at the memorial. They had grown up hearing the stories of the humans who wouldn't surrender, and many of them wore small pins with Earth's symbol, not as a mark of conquest, but as a reminder of what ordinary people could do when they chose to be extraordinary. The Phrase that had started as mockery became the galaxy's greatest compliment. Every species backed down, but humanity stepped in, was now spoken with respect, carved into monuments, and taught to children as an example of true heroism. The galaxy had learned that sometimes the smallest voice, speaking for what's right, can be louder than the mightiest empire's threats.